You think you know Pretty Woman. You think it's just a rom-com in thigh-high boots. But you've forgotten the real story, the one hiding behind that spontaneous laugh, that snap of a jewelry box, that $3,000 deal that was never meant to be romantic. What if I told you this modern fairy tale was born out of darkness? That its heart was almost broken before Julia Roberts ever smiled on screen? That the red dress almost never made it out of wardrobe? Welcome back to Hollywood, where nothing is accidental and everything is negotiable, including your happy ending. Here are 15 mind-blowing facts you didn't know about Pretty Woman, and one or two that might change how you see it forever. Pretty Woman began as a gritty tale called 3000. Before it was a romantic comedy, Pretty Woman was a brutal cautionary tale titled 3000. In the original script, Vivian was addicted to drugs, and Edward dumped her back on the streets after their week together. Disney executives hated the darkness. Jeffrey Katzenberg championed a rewrite, transforming it into a modern-day Cinderella story. Gary Marshall softened the edges, Julia Roberts brought charm, and Richard Gere added mystery. What started as a seedy Hollywood noir about transactional love turned into a global hit about transformation, redemption, and the price of vulnerability. The $3,000, still the only thing that stayed. Julia Roberts was nearly replaced by a dozen other stars. Julia Roberts wasn't Hollywood's first pick. She wasn't even fifth. Meg Ryan, Diane Lane, Sandra Bullock, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Winona Ryder all passed or were passed over. Diane Lane came closest. She even did costume fittings. But scheduling conflicts booted her. The studio hesitated. Roberts was a relative newcomer, but Gary Marshall believed in her. She was luminous, grounded, disarmingly funny. He saw a fairy tale heroine with grit. When the cameras rolled, Roberts didn't just play Vivian, she became her. A dozen actresses might have worn the boots, but only one turned a streetwalker into America's sweetheart. Richard Gere almost said no, and Julia Roberts sealed the deal. Richard Gere was hesitant. He thought the character of Edward was flat, just a suit and good haircut. He turned it down multiple times, that is, until Julia Roberts walked into the room. Gary Marshall orchestrated a meeting, and as the two sat together awkwardly, Roberts passed Gere a post-it note. It read, "Please say yes." That single line, charming, vulnerable, impossible to ignore, changed his mind. He said yes. Suddenly, the ice-cold businessman had a pulse. Edward was no longer a transaction. He had a beating heart. All because a 22-year-old actress knew how to ask for what she wanted. Gere composed the piano scene, and it was all improv. That elegant piano scene in the hotel, totally improvised. Gary Marshall asked Gere what he usually did in hotels. "Play piano," he said. So Marshall told him to do just that. Gere sat at the keys and composed a romantic piece on the spot, later titled He Sleeps. Roberts entered the room, unscripted, and climbed onto the piano in a spontaneous moment of chemistry and seduction. What was supposed to be filler became iconic. The passion felt real because it was. No script, no marks, just two actors discovering a rhythm only they could hear. Sometimes magic isn't planned, it's played. The jewelry box snap was a prank, and it stayed. One of the film's most iconic moments wasn't in the script. While filming the necklace scene, Julia Roberts reached for the velvet box, and Richard Gere, egged on by Gary Marshall, snapped it shut as a prank. Roberts burst out laughing, completely surprised. That laugh, pure instinct, no acting. Marshall loved it so much he kept it in the final cut. It became the film's emotional heartbeat, a moment of levity that made Vivian feel real, vulnerable, and charming. That 1 second, born of a joke, became the scene fans remembered most. Proof that the best laughs are never rehearsed. The famous red dress almost wasn't red. The scarlet gown from the opera scene, the one burned into pop culture memory, was nearly black. Studio execs worried red would clash with Roberts' hair. Costume designer Marilyn Vance disagreed. She believed Vivian's transformation needed boldness, and red was the color of power, romance, and reinvention. She tested several shades before convincing Gary Marshall. The final choice lit up the screen. It wasn't just a dress, it was a moment of cinematic rebirth. In that dress, Vivian wasn't hiding anymore. She arrived. Fashion didn't just style the character, it sculpted the story. The studio wanted subtlety. Vance gave them fire. Shelley Michelle's body replaced Julia Roberts's in posters, that iconic poster of Vivian and Edward. The woman in the thigh-high boots isn't Julia Roberts. It's body double Shelley Michelle. The marketing team replaced Roberts's body, using Michelle for the pose and swapping in Roberts's face. Even Gere's hair was digitally altered, his originally gray locks dyed black in post-production. Why? Studio polish. They wanted perfection, symmetry, marketability. But the result became a cultural artifact, symbolizing the movie's Cinderella myth even if it wasn't authentic. The real Vivian had scuffed boots and scars, but in the poster, she's flawless, a reminder of how Hollywood still airbrushes even its most human stories. Gary Marshall's homeless cameo was a private joke blink, and you'll miss him. But Gary Marshall appears early in the film as a homeless man directing Edward. It wasn't just a Hitchcockian cameo, it was a private joke. Edward, the lost billionaire, gets help from someone society ignores. Marshall, ever the subversive optimist, wanted to underline the irony. In a movie about class and perception, it's the so-called invisible who gives guidance. The line, "What's your dream?" was Marshall's way of flipping the narrative. The American dream, the fantasy of transformation, it doesn't belong to the rich. It belongs to everyone, even those who sleep on sidewalks and still believe. Julia Roberts couldn't laugh on cue, so Marshall tickled her. During the scene where Vivian is watching I Love Lucy and laughing hysterically, Julia Roberts hit a wall. She couldn't produce a believable laugh on command. Director Gary Marshall, unwilling to settle for a fake giggle, tried a different tactic. He tickled her between takes. The result was real, infectious laughter that felt spontaneous and heartfelt. Roberts didn't have to act. She just had to react. Marshall understood that authenticity matters more than precision. In a film built on chemistry and charisma, this detail, silly as it sounds, captured the unfiltered joy at the heart of Vivian's most human moments. Verdi's La Traviata wasn't just an opera, it was foreshadowing. When Edward takes Vivian to the opera, the choice wasn't random. They watch Verdi's La Traviata, a 19th century tragedy about a courtesan who falls in love with a wealthy man. In other words, Vivian is watching her own life on stage. Except in Verdi's version, the heroine dies. For the film's softer modern rewrite, Vivian lives and thrives. But the scene plants a seed. This fairy tale could have ended very differently. Gary Marshall didn't just insert culture, he used it to echo the stakes. It's not just a date night. It's a fork in the road of her story. The song, Oh Pretty Woman, nearly didn't make the cut. Roy Orbison's Oh Pretty Woman is synonymous with the film, but it almost didn't happen. Licensing the song proved difficult, and at one point, the production considered using a sound alike. But Marshall fought hard for the original. When Vivian struts down Rodeo Drive, armed with new clothes and even newer confidence, that beat drops and the transformation is complete. The song wasn't just a title inspiration, it was the anthem of reinvention. Without it, the montage would lose its power. The lyrics, playful and knowing, became the heartbeat of a moment that defined 90s movie magic. It was one of Disney's highest-grossing R-rated films. Despite its romantic comedy label, Pretty Woman was rated R for its adult themes and sexual content. That didn't stop audiences. With a modest $14 million budget, it went on to gross over $463 million globally, making it one of Disney's highest-grossing R-rated films for decades. Under the Touchstone Pictures banner, Disney managed to balance mature content with mainstream appeal. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. At a time when studios doubted women-led blockbusters, Pretty Woman proved love stories could make bank, especially when dressed in red and carrying just enough scandal to make Cinderella blush. Julia Roberts became the youngest actress ever to win a Golden Globe for a comedy. At just 22, Julia Roberts didn't just star in Pretty Woman, she conquered Hollywood. Her performance as Vivian earned her the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy, making her the youngest actress at the time to win in that category. She also snagged her first Academy Award nomination. Critics praised her magnetic charm, her emotional range, and her ability to elevate what could have been a trope into something timeless. Roberts didn't just play a hooker with a heart of gold. She played a woman discovering her worth, and Hollywood never looked away again. A sequel was written, but Julia Roberts turned it down. Yes, there was a sequel script, tentatively titled Pretty Woman 2. It explored Edward and Vivian's relationship after the fairy tale ended. But Julia Roberts wasn't interested. She believed the magic was already captured. Revisiting it would only cheapen what had felt spontaneous and sincere. Richard Gere agreed. Instead, the two reunited nearly a decade later for Runaway Bride. Hollywood rarely leaves money on the table, but Roberts had the power to say no. Sometimes, the greatest love stories don't need a second act. They end with a limo, a fire escape, and the words, "This is my night." The red dress lives on in museums and fashion history. That red gown, the one Vivian wears to the opera, became more than costume. It became cinematic legend. Designed by Marilyn Vance, it's now housed in museums, studied in fashion schools, and revered in magazines like Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. Its silhouette, its color, its transformation symbolism, it all crystallized a moment in Hollywood history. Roberts herself called it the most beautiful dress I've ever worn. In a film about image and self-worth, the dress wasn't just fabric. It was armor. It was proof that style can tell stories, and that sometimes what you wear can rewrite who you are. So now you know, Pretty Woman wasn't a product of studio certainty. It was a film built on rewrites, pranks, and bold bets, a story rescued from the gutter by charisma, chemistry, and one director who believed in happy endings, if only because the original one was too cruel to keep. Julia wasn't supposed to be Vivian. Gere wasn't supposed to stay. The jewelry box was a joke. The dress was a fight. And yet, here it is, immortal, iconic, untouchable. In the end, it wasn't a movie about a girl saved by a man. It was about a woman saving the fantasy and walking off in heels no one thought she could wear. Roll credits, but leave the dream playing.